The post-war era wasn't just defined by suburban expansion and economic prosperity. It was also marked by the disappearance of traditional crops from American gardens. 20 plants that sustained previous generations were systematically removed from seed catalogs, actively discouraged by officials, or explicitly prohibited by law. The stories behind these banishments reveal a changing nation that valued conformity over tradition. Black currants. During the mid-20th century, black currant bushes vanished from American landscapes due to federal restrictions that lasted until the 1960s. These small berries, packed with 5 times more vitamin C than oranges, were deemed dangerous, not to humans, but to the timber industry. As carriers of white pine blister rust, they threatened America's valuable pine forests. Government agents went door to door in many communities, ordering families to uproot bushes that had provided nourishment for generations. European immigrants who had brought these plants as connections to their homeland watched as their cultural heritage was destroyed in the name of economic protection. The prohibition was so comprehensive that an entire generation grew up never tasting these distinctive berries that were still enjoyed throughout Europe. When the ban was finally relaxed decades later, the cultural knowledge of growing and using black currants had largely disappeared, leaving most Americans unaware of what they had lost. Opium poppies. The delicate beauty of opium poppies once graced countless American gardens, their vibrant pink, red, and purple blooms adding splashes of color to flower beds nationwide. Grandmothers harvested the seeds for baking traditional breads and pastries, never considering these ornamental flowers as anything dangerous. But by the 1950s, federal authorities had a different perspective. As awareness of the plant's potential for narcotic production grew, these innocent garden flowers became classified as controlled substances. Homeowners who had grown poppies for decades suddenly found themselves at risk of serious legal consequences simply for maintaining their traditional gardens. The irony was that most gardeners had no interest in or knowledge of the plant's drug-producing capabilities. They simply appreciated their beauty and culinary uses. Nevertheless, garden clubs stopped recommending them, seed companies quit selling them, and these once common flowers retreated from American landscapes, victims of changing social attitudes and stricter drug enforcement policies. Castor Bean. With its dramatic star-shaped leaves and exotic appearance, the castor bean plant was once a staple in ornamental gardens across America. Grandmothers appreciated its tropical look and rapid growth, using it to create privacy screens and focal points in their landscaping. Few realized that hidden within the attractive speckled seeds was one of nature's most potent toxins, ricin. As suburban neighborhoods filled with young families in the post-war boom, the potential danger became impossible to ignore. Just a handful of seeds contained enough poison to be lethal, and their colorful, bean-like appearance made them particularly attractive to curious children. Garden magazines that had once promoted castor beans as must-have ornamentals began warning against them. Nurseries stopped carrying them, and existing plants were quietly removed from public and private gardens alike. The plant's undeniable beauty couldn't outweigh the risk it posed in communities designed around family life and child safety. Kudzu. It's hard to imagine now, but kudzu was once actively promoted by the government as a miracle crop. During the Depression and Dust Bowl years, the USDA paid farmers to plant this Asian vine, praising its ability to prevent soil erosion, feed livestock, and even nourish families during hard times. The leaves could be cooked like spinach, the flowers made into jelly, and the starchy roots processed into flour. But kudzu had conquest in mind, not cooperation. Growing up to a foot per day in southern climates, it began smothering everything in its path: trees, abandoned buildings, telephone poles, and entire landscapes. By the 1950s, agricultural officials were frantically backpedaling, reclassifying kudzu from miracle crop to noxious weed. Communities that had embraced it just years earlier now fought a losing battle against its relentless spread. Today, kudzu covers over 7 million acres across the South, a living monument to the danger of introducing non-native species without understanding their potential impact. Jerusalem artichokes. These knobby underground tubers were hailed as a wonder crop during wartime rationing, productive, nutritious, and virtually indestructible. But by the 1950s, Jerusalem artichokes had earned a less flattering nickname in many households: fartichokes. Their high inulin content, while beneficial for some, caused severe digestive distress for many people, producing gas and bloating that became socially unacceptable in polite post-war society. Suburban homemakers quietly abandoned these once valued vegetables, embarrassed by their uncomfortable effects. Agricultural extensions stopped promoting them, and garden writers found more genteel alternatives to recommend. What made their fall from grace particularly dramatic was their persistence. Once established, Jerusalem artichokes were nearly impossible to eradicate, with even the smallest tuber fragment sprouting new plants. Families who had enthusiastically planted them during the war now fought losing battles to remove them from their gardens, watching in frustration as they returned year after year despite eradication efforts. Giant hogweed. Few plants commanded attention like giant hogweed, with towering stalks reaching 15 feet tall and spectacular white flower clusters spanning 2 feet across. Victorian gardeners imported it as an ornamental showpiece, and some adventurous souls even experimented with eating the thick stems, preparing them similar to rhubarb. But beneath this impressive appearance lurked a serious danger that became widely recognized in the 1950s. The plant's sap contained chemicals that, when exposed to sunlight, caused severe burns, blistering, and permanent scarring on human skin. Children playing near giant hogweed often ended up hospitalized with injuries resembling third-degree burns. As awareness of these risks spread, authorities declared it a public menace. Garden clubs warned members against it, and government agencies began active eradication campaigns. The plant that had once been prized for its dramatic presence became a symbol of how ornamental gardening could pose unexpected threats to public health and safety. Gooseberries. The humble gooseberry bush, once a fixture in American gardens since colonial times, fell victim to the same agricultural policy that targeted black currants. As alternate hosts for white pine blister rust, these productive plants were deemed threats to the lumber industry and systematically eliminated from many regions. Families who had relied on their tart green and red berries for generations were ordered to destroy their bushes or face penalties. The eradication was particularly heartbreaking because gooseberries were exceptionally well adapted to American growing conditions, producing reliable harvests even in challenging climates. Their distinctive flavor, part grape, part apple, made them irreplaceable in traditional pies, preserves, and wines. Unlike some banned plants, gooseberries pose no direct threat to human health or safety, making their prohibition seem especially arbitrary to the gardeners forced to remove them. The ban's effectiveness was evident in how quickly these once common fruits faded from American culinary consciousness, with most people born after 1960 never having tasted a fresh gooseberry. Pokeweed. Spring dinner tables across Appalachia and the South once featured poke salad, the young leaves of pokeweed carefully prepared through multiple boilings to remove their toxins. This traditional green connected generations with knowledge of proper preparation passed down from mother to daughter. But the 1950s brought increased awareness of pokeweed's dangers. Mature plants contain powerful toxins that can cause respiratory failure and even death if improperly prepared. As families moved to suburbs and traditional food knowledge fragmented, agricultural extensions began actively discouraging pokeweed consumption. Health departments issued warnings, and what had been a valued spring tonic became reclassified as a dangerous weed. The shift was particularly significant because it represented not just the loss of a food source, but the erosion of cultural knowledge. Without understanding the precise preparation methods, pokeweed was indeed dangerous, and as fewer people learned these traditional techniques, a once common food plant was abandoned. Today, most Americans would be shocked to learn their grandparents regularly consumed what is now considered a toxic plant. Mulberry trees. The sweet purple stains on children's hands and faces once signaled mulberry season, a time when neighborhood kids climbed trees for nature's candy while adults harvested buckets of berries for pies, jams, and wine. But the 1950s suburban ideal had no place for these messy, productive trees. As immaculate lawns and clean driveways became status symbols, mulberry trees were increasingly viewed as nuisances. Their abundant fruits dropped on sidewalks, stained cars, and attracted birds that left their own messes behind. City councils across America passed ordinances restricting or banning mulberry trees in residential areas, and developers routinely eliminated them from new subdivisions. Existing trees were cut down and replaced with fruitless ornamentals that offered shade without the inconvenience of actual food production. This shift perfectly captured the post-war movement away from productive home landscapes toward purely decorative ones. Appearances mattered more than function, and the slight inconvenience of seasonal fruit drop became unacceptable in communities striving for magazine-perfect appearances. American chestnuts. Unlike most crops on this list, American chestnuts weren't banned by human choice, but by biological disaster. These magnificent trees once dominated eastern forests, with some reaching 100 feet tall and 10 feet in diameter. Their sweet, nutritious nuts fed wildlife and humans alike, becoming an essential part of rural economies. Families gathered chestnuts by the wagon load, selling them to markets in cities where street vendors roasted them on cold winter days. But the early 20th century brought chestnut blight, a fungal disease that ravaged these trees with unprecedented speed. By the 1950s, an estimated 4 billion American chestnuts had died, essentially eliminating the species from our landscapes and food systems. The loss was catastrophic, economically, ecologically, and culturally. A tree that had provided reliable food, superior lumber, and tannin for leather production simply vanished within a single generation. The few remaining trees were so rare that most Americans born after 1950 grew up never tasting a true American chestnut, experiencing only Chinese or European varieties that lacked the native tree's exceptional qualities. Tree of Heaven. The ironically named Tree of Heaven was once welcomed in American cities for its ability to thrive in poor soil and provide quick shade. Immigrants from China brought it as a connection to their homeland, and it spread through urban areas where few other trees could survive industrial pollution. But by the 1950s, this once valued tree had fallen dramatically from grace. Its aggressive root system cracked sidewalks and foundations, while its prolific seed production and ability to sprout from roots made it nearly impossible to control. Perhaps most damaging was the discovery that it released chemicals into the soil that inhibited the growth of other plants, a process called allelopathy. As Americans became increasingly concerned about invasive species, the Tree of Heaven became a prime target for removal. Garden clubs that had once recommended it now organized campaigns against it. The final blow to its reputation came when it was identified as the preferred host for the spotted lanternfly, a destructive pest threatening fruit crops and forests. A tree once planted with hope became a symbol of ecological short-sightedness. Elderberries. The humble elderberry bush, once found in nearly every rural backyard, became increasingly scarce in the 1950s as concerns about its safety gained traction. While the properly prepared berries were treasured for their immune-boosting properties and distinctive flavor, other parts of the plant contain cyanogenic glycosides that can cause nausea and digestive distress. Several widely publicized cases of children becoming ill after chewing on stems or eating unripe berries led agricultural extensions to discourage home cultivation. The timing coincided with the rise of commercial pharmaceuticals and processed foods, making traditional remedies like elderberry syrup seem both risky and outdated. Families who had relied on these plants for generations gradually removed them, often at the recommendation of county agents concerned about liability. The irony is that properly prepared elderberries are exceptionally nutritious, containing more vitamin C and antioxidants than most common fruits. As traditional knowledge about proper harvesting and preparation faded, so did these valuable plants from American landscapes, only to be rediscovered decades later and sold as premium health supplements. Pawpaws. America's largest native fruit, the pawpaw, was systematically marginalized during the 1950s despite its extraordinary flavor and historical importance. With custard-like flesh tasting of banana, mango, and vanilla, pawpaws had been enjoyed by Native Americans and settlers for centuries. But as agricultural extensions pushed for standardization and commercialization, pawpaws were actively discouraged for several reasons. Their short shelf life made them unsuitable for supermarket distribution, and their slow growth, taking 5 to 8 years to bear fruit, conflicted with the era's emphasis on quick returns. Perhaps most significantly, they couldn't be mechanically harvested, putting them at odds with the industrialization of agriculture. Extension agents steered farmers and gardeners toward commercially viable crops, dismissing pawpaws as old-fashioned and impractical. The result was that an entire generation grew up never tasting this remarkable native fruit, and the trees became increasingly rare in both cultivated and wild settings. Only in recent decades have pawpaws begun to reclaim their place in American foodways, championed by the local food movement for the very qualities that made them impractical in the 1950s. Barberries. The tart red berries of the barberry bush once brightened winter meals across America, providing valuable vitamin C when fresh fruit was scarce. European and Persian immigrants particularly valued these plants, using the intensely flavorful berries in traditional dishes and medicines. But barberries harbored a secret that led to their downfall. They served as alternate hosts for wheat stem rust, a fungal disease that threatened grain production. In a nation where wheat was king, barberries became enemies of agricultural prosperity. The federal government launched an aggressive eradication campaign, making it illegal to grow, sell, or transport barberries in wheat-growing regions. Agricultural agents were empowered to enter private property and destroy any barberry bushes they found, regardless of the owner's wishes. Families who had cultivated these plants for generations watched as their food heritage was sacrificed for the greater economic good. The campaign was remarkably effective. By the 1960s, barberries had virtually disappeared from American gardens, and most people had forgotten they were ever used as food. Autumn olive. In a twist of historical irony, autumn olive was actually promoted by the Soil Conservation Service in the early 1950s as a solution for erosion control and wildlife habitat. The fast-growing shrubs with silvery leaves and red berries seemed perfect for reclaiming disturbed lands. Government agencies distributed millions of seedlings to farmers and landowners, encouraging widespread planting. But autumn olive proved too successful, spreading aggressively beyond intended boundaries and crowding out native vegetation. By the late 1950s, agricultural officials were frantically backpedaling, reclassifying it from beneficial plant to invasive menace. The berries themselves are actually nutritious and flavorful, containing more lycopene than tomatoes, but this food value was overshadowed by the plant's ecological impact. As environmental awareness grew, autumn olive became a poster child for the dangers of introducing non-native species. Properties where it had been intentionally planted now faced costly eradication efforts, and regulations in many states shifted from promoting autumn olive to prohibiting it entirely. A complete reversal within a single decade. Chokecherries. The name itself, chokecherry, contributed to this native fruit's decline in the 1950s, despite its historical importance in American foodways. Native Americans and early settlers valued these small dark berries for their unique flavor when properly prepared, using them in pemmican, jellies, and syrups. But the raw berry's astringency, which causes an unpleasant puckering sensation, combined with concerns about the pits containing compounds that could be harmful if consumed in large quantities, led to their gradual disappearance from home gardens. As Americans increasingly preferred foods that were convenient and consistently sweet, chokecherries' complexity and required preparation knowledge made them seem unnecessarily difficult. Agricultural extensions began recommending more user-friendly fruits, and nurseries stopped offering chokecherry trees and shrubs. The cultural knowledge of how to properly harvest and prepare these berries faded as the post-war generation embraced modern conveniences over traditional practices. A fruit that had sustained communities for centuries became an obscurity, recognized only by foragers and those with connections to indigenous food traditions. Persimmons. American persimmons fell victim to widespread misunderstanding during the 1950s as their unique ripening requirements confused a generation increasingly disconnected from seasonal eating patterns. Unlike their Asian cousins, American persimmons must be fully soft and ripe, often after the first frost, before they lose their astringency and develop their honey-like sweetness. Too many people bit into unripe persimmons, experiencing the intensely unpleasant, mouth-puckering sensation that made the fruit seem inedible or even dangerous. This led to a reputation problem that caused many gardeners to remove their persimmon trees, thinking the fruit was naturally unpalatable. Garden writers and agricultural extensions focused on foolproof crops for suburban homeowners rarely recommended persimmons, contributing to their decline. The trees themselves were beautiful and productive, requiring minimal care and producing abundant fruit for decades. But one bad experience with an unripe persimmon was enough to turn people away forever. As traditional knowledge about proper harvesting timing faded, so did these remarkable native trees from American landscapes. Cornelian cherries. These early blooming trees, with their bright yellow flowers and ruby-red fruits, were once valued for both ornamental beauty and practical food production. Brought to America by European immigrants, Cornelian cherries ripened earlier than most fruits, providing a welcome harvest when little else was available. Their tart flavor made them perfect for preserves, and their high pectin content meant they gelled easily without additives. But the 1950s saw a distinct shift away from these old-world plants as agricultural extensions and nurseries promoted American-bred varieties that aligned with changing national tastes. The tart, complex flavors that European palates appreciated were increasingly rejected in favor of sweeter, simpler options. Nursery catalogs reclassified Cornelian cherries from fruit trees to purely ornamental shrubs, erasing their food value from public consciousness. The trees themselves remained in some landscapes, but their fruits went unharvested, considered inedible by a generation that had lost the knowledge of their culinary uses. Today, most Americans who encounter these plants have no idea the bright red fruits are not only edible, but were once highly valued. Crab apples. Perhaps no fruit better illustrates the 1950s shift from productive to purely ornamental landscaping than the crab apple. These small-fruited relatives of eating apples had been essential to American homesteads for generations, providing the high pectin fruits needed for jellies, preserves, and cider making. But as commercial pectin became widely available and supermarket jelly replaced homemade versions, crab apples lost their practical purpose. Nurseries responded by developing purely ornamental varieties, selected for spectacular spring blossoms, but producing little or no fruit. The connection between crab apples and food was deliberately severed in favor of trees that looked beautiful but created no mess of fallen fruit. Garden writers praised these new fruitless varieties as perfect for modern landscapes, where appearance mattered more than productivity. Traditional crab apples with their abundant, tart fruits were increasingly hard to find in nursery catalogs, replaced by sterile cultivars that offered spring beauty without autumn bounty. A tree that had once served both practical and aesthetic purposes was reduced to mere decoration. Medlars. No fruit better represents the clash between traditional food knowledge and modern convenience than the medlar. These unusual fruits, somewhere between an apple and a pear in appearance, require a process called bletting, essentially controlled rotting, before they're edible. When properly bletted, Medlars develop a rich, complex flavor reminiscent of spiced applesauce with notes of wine and caramel. European immigrants brought medlar trees to America, continuing centuries-old traditions of harvesting the fruits after the first frost and letting them soften for weeks before enjoying their unique taste. But the 1950s American ideal of perfect-looking, immediately edible fruits had no place for medlars. Their requirement for patience and their unappealing appearance when ripe, soft and brown, made them seem primitive and undesirable compared to shiny supermarket offerings. Garden writers stopped mentioning them, nurseries quit carrying them, and existing trees were removed when older gardeners passed away. The medlar's disappearance symbolized a broader cultural shift from seasonal rhythms and traditional knowledge to year-round availability and standardized appearances, regardless of flavor or nutritional value. These 20 crops tell a story of America's transformation from a nation of diverse regional foodways to one prioritizing standardization, convenience, and visual perfection over flavor and tradition. Many of these forgotten plants are now being rediscovered by a new generation seeking connection to our agricultural heritage. Hit that subscribe button and check out our next video.